And you guys are welcome to talk to each other about what you're sort of saying. We're going to talk about them here as a group in a few minutes.
We don't get lunch on the 20th.
That's what I was thinking.
We will have lunch somewhere in the middle of the side visits, yes.
He's a class clown.
We don't care. Yeah.
Okay, let's go get started. All right, so first of all, just so that everybody is on the same page with respect to kind of where we are, schedule-wise, next week we'll obviously be doing the finance course lecture from 8 to 3, and then from 3 to 5 next week will be the real estate development midterm for my course, which will obviously cover all the stuff that we're covering today, as well as what we have previously covered in the development course. Okay, so all the financial feasibility stuff that we've gone through today, we're going to go through a little bit more of that a little bit later. But all of that will be covered, lecture material focused on the different forms of development and kind of some of the issues that are unique to each property type, some of the governmental, regulatory things that we've talked about, also some of the lessons that you even learned from doing the case study competition project, that sort of thing. Okay, then on March the 7th will be guest speaker day, which will all be physically here, okay? And 4 of our advisory board members will be coming in and talking about different areas of specialization that they have, spending a couple of hours each with us. So that will be out through the course of March the 7th. Then on March the 14th, have a little bit more kind of finalizing the finance lecture, and we'll have the final exam for the finance course. We'll obviously have lunch, come back from that, and then kind of at that point we'll give you back your final exam and go over those right after lunch. Then from 3 to 5 on that day, the development course We'll be doing the presentations, the group presentations for the case study project from 3 to 5. And then on our final day of class, March 21st, we'll be doing a number of site visits. Kevin is setting those up right now, and probably, ideally what I'm trying to do is have him set them up where half of them will be probably here in Fort Lauderdale, maybe the other half in Miami, okay? And we're trying to maybe make the Miami piece early, and then the Fort Lauderdale piece, the afternoon piece, is ideally what we want to try to do. And the reason for that is because then at the end of March 21st, then much like last semester, we'll kind of have an end of the semester social event kind of thing, probably do kind of what we did, whether we go over to Royal Pig or something like that, and give everybody a chance to decompress after all of this is said and done, okay? Make sense? Yes?
So the development exam will start at 3 o'clock next week, not 2?
That is correct.
Okay.
In this particular case, or well, I guess we could start it at 2. Do y'all want to start at 2? Okay, we'll start at 2. Or what we can actually do is at 2, I'll open it up for sort of last minute questions, that sort of thing, and as soon as we finish with the questions, then we can just jump on into the exam. How's that?
Okay.
Fair enough? Okay, yep.
Are we gonna get like a study after that, or?
Once again, just focus on, all the stuff that we've talked about in class. All the regulatory issues, all the different terms that we've talked about, the calculation of the financial feasibility stuff. Just like with the finance class, just focus on the stuff that we've covered in class. Yep.
Will there be a format, like a certain
It's going to be
number?
probably more short answer, conceptual, than it will be calculation. So let's just say we'll do 25 questions again. This time, let's say we'll have 10 questions that are financial feasibility, and then the other 15 will be short answer.
The financial feasibility will be mostly what we did in class today.
Yeah, well, and on the first day.
We've covered mainly commercial. In the book, the whole book is the mixed residential and retail. Are we going to be covering that?
We're going to be doing a little more retail this afternoon. Okay, and the industrial. Okay, all right, any questions? Yep.
Can you just clarify, because there's some misinformation going around. We need on March 4th to submit for the MIT project, an MS Project Pro and a paper. Can you clarify that?
No, I can't. And the reason I can't, that's not my course, that's Kevin's course.
Okay.
So you need to email Kevin directly, since he's teaching that course, and ask him what the specific
You asked him to respond.
deadlines are.
Okay.
Okay? Because I have nothing to do with that.
Okay. Okay.
That's his course. Okay, any other questions on this before we move on? Okay, so what I ask you guys to do, to potentially come up with some of the topics out of the particular trade journal that you were given, and just want to spend a little bit of time kind of exploring some of these, and the reason for that is, let's see what kind of things these folks are talking about. You know, what are some of the things that they find important or they find interesting, they're finding that, you know, effectively merit publication at this particular moment in time, because all these publications are within the past few months. So what are the things on their minds as kind of professional associations? So we'll, just to start off with, what are some of the topics? Just throw out the topics. Okay.
Well, in mine it was bidding wars, and it was talking about how a crowd of buyers are chasing a smaller number of properties for sale, and it's causing the cap rates to go down.
Okay, so and this is which publication is this one?
It's the SCT.
Okay,
the
so
shopping
the shopping centers today. All right, so excellent point. So what you're saying is happening, and which I would agree. You've got a lot of money out there chasing deals, a lot of cheap money out there chasing deals, and as a result, as obviously there's an oversupply of money chasing the deals, that is having the impact of driving down the cap rates, ultimately inflating the values of the underlying properties. Okay, so, yeah, that's a huge concern, absolutely. Okay, Frederick?
Mine's dealt with sustainability and parking. Actually, they have an app, it's called Pentagon Row. So basically, you determine if your parking space is filled, or what's the closest available parking space to the store you're trying to get to, and reduce emissions of driving around, circling around the parking lot. It's pretty neat.
Okay. Well, I've noticed that I guess, certainly, here in Broward County and also, I guess, in Miami, that, you have that situation of where you're able to sort of pay for your parking, with your, with an app on your phone and ultimately just not have to put any money in the meter and everything, just put in your parking space number, that sort of thing. So, certainly that is but this, it sounds like you're going a step further and actually saying where is the available parking.
Yes, and also, of course, it's gonna have the, where's my car? You
Right.
can find your car through the app also.
Okay.
If you
Cool. Is that also at the shopping center today?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so while we're sort of staying on that theme, who else has a shopping center today? Okay,
Mine talks about how 70% of the world's chains are adding new stores.
okay.
So they're all, all the chains are expanding.
Any particular type?
When they go through grocers, Whole Foods, Publix, how many stores they're adding, how many they have now.
Okay.
Interesting, Pizza Hut here has a liquor component to it. I never knew Pizza Hut had liquor inside the store. I've never seen it before. But
Here,
But they have 7,500 stores and they're adding 350 this year. So it's just got a.
Now, why do you, okay, this also kind of goes into this whole business of with the shopping centers, the first article in the bidding wars. What is happening? I mean, we sort of say, well, is it the economy? The economy is now all of a sudden robust and everything is going in the right direction. The only way you can say that is we still, as we have talked about before, we have what? Artificially low interest rates that are being kept artificially low by the Federal Reserve on purpose. Matter of fact, they even just said just recently that, probably it may be in like a June or July meeting that they're potentially thinking about raising the rates simply because they think, well, we finally have kind of maybe made enough progress toward our economy, going in the right direction, and they want to, stave off inflation, a handful of other things. But the point is, we have, for the past several years, to get out of the mess that we got ourselves into previously, we, have offered these ridiculously low interest rates, cost of borrowing, which inherently does what? Makes businesses more profitable because they're spending less money on potentially the space that they're having to occupy or cost of actually doing business by virtue of the money they're having to borrow to set up their business. So the loan payments that they've got on either whether it's the business operation or on the real estate are probably lower. Now, but yet that gets counterbalanced to some extent by the fact that you have the actual values of the assets, the real estate assets themselves, going up, so the sale prices are going up. Now, the problem, or one of the problems that potentially would happen, if we follow all this to the logical conclusion, if interest rates start creeping back up, that's going to definitely have a dampering effect, on the prices, and all that escalation that we've probably gotten will either stabilize or potentially go back down again. So that is something of very significant concern. So this issue that Dustin, raises, that you've got all these stores, you're starting, new stores, is a lot of that maybe being driven by the fact that there's still a lot of cheap money searching for, effectively where can we place it? And you wonder, once again, how long-term or sustainable that really is, just from the standpoint of if we sort of know, in one sense, on the horizon, we've got this pending increase in interest rates.
I was actually just looking at an article in this magazine about how those interest rates affect cap rates.
Yeah.
And then the flip side of that, while interest rates do rise, it'll improve employment, and also rents will effectively go up. So how does that all coincide?
Right. The whole thing that as interest rates increase, what impact is that going to have on cap rates? It should increase the cap rates, which as we said, would then put downward pressure on the values of the real estate, or upward pressure on the rental rates. Okay.
So right, I guess it sort of depends on like what's your investment play. If you're looking to buy and you have a short holding period, and this is probably going to affect you in a bad way. And if you're looking to do long-term holds, then it's a better thing for you.
Eventually. All right. All right. Other articles? Yep.
They're giving 6 reasons why Florida is the right choice for business.
Okay. And so why?
Business climate,
Okay.
market opportunities, workforce, infrastructure, global access, and quality of life.
Okay. So it's kind of an interesting thing, because whenever you start comparing one part of the country against another, why is it that certain states kind of stand out? Obviously Florida's doing very well, Texas is doing very well, but then you've got other parts of the country not so much. Texas actually suffered a little bit recently. Why? Because of the oil prices going down.
Especially in Houston.
Yeah. Whereas they were going absolutely just gangbusters, then now all of a sudden, you've got a lot of stuff that has ground to a halt just because of such a dominance.
The home building side.
Yeah, right. Well, it trickles down to obviously all. But right now, at the moment, obviously, we're doing just fine, speaking of Florida, but other parts of the country still plenty of suffering, still significant amounts of unemployment, not a lot of increases in the values of the properties there. So, yeah, last question. Yep.
This is kind of interesting. It's cell tower leases. And it talks about that the cell towers are leased by the landowners. It's a land lease. But due to the fact that most of the cell towers are owned by the AT&Ts and the large, publicly traded company, the lease and the value of this lease increase at the end of the lease term due to the fact that they might have to deconstruct the tower if the landowner doesn't renovate the lease. And the landowner can sell the lease, and it's tradable, and everybody looks for it because of the value of location and the scarcity of the cell tower leases.
Yeah, I mean, historically, you owned a piece of land, and you would be approached by one of the cell phone, companies that wants to put up a cell phone tower, and in some cases, just be kind of a standalone tower, on a green piece of dirt. In other cases, obviously, on the top of, rooftops and that sort of thing. And then you would be, simply paid a, monthly or, every 6 months or whatever it might be, fee for, allowing that to be located on your property. And you're absolutely right that what a lot of folks chose to do is to say, instead of, me just collecting these checks on how often they occur, why not go ahead and get the upfront cash value of these and effectively sell them off to someone else that actually wants the steady income? I would prefer, to just maybe cash out, get all the money up front for the full value of the lease. And so they do become, tradable items in the sense of being able to sell them off to someone else and get that discounted value up front.
Yeah, but don't you have to own the land?
Yes. Well, no, you can sell off the rights to the income is the point.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's interesting because they collect additional rent, depending on the location, depending on the traffic count, the demographics around. So it's sort of a percentage rent lease on top of the ground lease or the land lease.
Interesting.
That's pretty interesting.
Okay. All right. Others?
This is a CCIM.
Okay.
Mine talks about how the young generation, millennials, are changing the shapes of the cities because they're tending to move towards the downtown areas. And so everything real estate wise is changing, the sizes of the living units, office spaces, retail.
So a lot of things we've been talking about, the whole thing of the millennials saying we can potentially ditch the car and walk to work or take public transit. We may not even have to go into the office at all. If we can work out of home, we potentially are so burdened with student debt that we can no longer afford to buy a house, so we're forced to, get an apartment, but yet we want to be located next to the really cool restaurants and bars, because that's where we're going to be spending, all of our free time. So I mean, all those kinds of things begin but to what extent that, as we were talking about, I think even last week a little bit, to what extent, does it apply to that entire group, or is it still just kind of applying to maybe bits and pieces and segments of that market? But yeah, no, absolutely, there's no question that most of the developers are thinking, what do we need to do to try to, accommodate that mindset.
They're talking about micro spaces in Nashville, like tiny apartments, units, like really tiny for 1 or 2 people at the most, and reshaping the size of buildings, residential areas within the square miles of the city.
One thing that we did not specifically address, I remember last week in our discussion, because we had a pretty good discussion on this, obviously, but one of the things that I don't think we ever quite got into, which I think is really important in all of this, is has that group migrated away from traditional commercialism? In other words, the whole thing of the status symbols that, let's say, certainly my generation and before, are very, obsessed with to a certain extent, about, where they live, their car, their clothes, their food, their, whatever it is, does this millennial generation, and once again, is it an issue of ideology or is it out of necessity? You follow what I'm saying? Because in one sense, is this the millennial generation saying, we're so overburdened with school, debt, we can't afford anything other than this, so therefore this is what we're going to live in and this is how we're going to live, versus, is it more the ideological that we want to, once again, we don't really need all this ostentatious, stuff, and we're quite content living in a 200, 300 square foot mini apartment kind of situation. I mean, what do you think it is? Do you think it's out of necessity, or do you think it's out of more sort of ideological shift?
Might be a mix.
No ideological shift.
Okay, not to try to put anybody on the spot, but is anyone here under the age of 25? Okay, all right. So the few of you that fit into kind of that category. Now we want to listen to them, are the strongest. So those of you that fit within that category, do you think it's ideological, or do you think it's necessity?
I would definitely say necessity.
What do you think?
I think some of them want the smaller spaces. It's easier. They want to live in the city and it allows them to. So in that respect, it's out of necessity. But I mean, they could get a larger space if they moved
Further out.
plantation versus, Fort Lauderdale. And I think I know people. I have friends that live in Brickell and they could get bigger places, but they live in a studio because why do these guys, like, why do I need a walk-in closet and a gourmet kitchen and all of these things?
Right.
So I think it just depends. There are groups of millennials that probably do it out of necessity, and there's probably actually a big majority that don't.
Okay. Anybody else want to tackle it?
I'll take the option of that.
Okay.
But both still the option. I think the minority is not necessity. So the majority is necessity, the minority would be choice.
Okay. Anybody else? You guys want to weigh in back there?
I would say necessity also.
Okay. All right. So this whole thing, I mean, do you think it's something that's here to stay for a while, or do you think it's just kind of like it's a passing fad?
Here to stay for a while,
Yeah.
a good decade at least.
I mean, do you agree with my assessment at all, or you can totally, disagree, but I mean, to me, a lot of it was driven by the fact that and the number one thing that always pops in my head is the student loan debt. That you've got a lot of these folks that are walking out with, upwards of $100,000 or close to it or more, and they get a job that maybe barely meets the threshold of being able to pay off that, let alone take on the other normal financial responsibilities that.
You pile on the housing cost growth, cost of living growth without a commensurate income growth.
Right.
And it's just more difficult
Sure.
to go find a place to live.
No,
I think
absolutely.
that affects everyone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Well, it does to a certain extent, but at the same time, is this group more adversely affected because they simply, once again, sort of starting out the gate, they had more barriers.
Right. Earning power is.
Once again, not to make you all mad at me, but, whenever I graduated college, I had zero debt. I paid for all of my college all the way through, working jobs, and, I had zero debt whenever I came out, so the moment that I walked out of college, I was debt-free. But yet, college didn't, college only cost, if I was going through, $500 a semester.
Yeah.
What?
You can pay for it.
Yeah. No, but I'm saying,
Well, yeah.
Now we're mad at you.
yeah, it was a lot more money back then, but the point, it's not,
5 miles to school.
my point is my generation, for the most part, was very fortunate. Very fortunate. Education costs were low. So now granted, there were peer groups of mine that chose to go a more expensive option, but in my case, that was the case. So all I'm saying is that this generation as a whole is much more burdened with that one singular issue above and beyond all of the other issues, that one single issue. And so, that's why I'm sort of, kind of questioning, is this, kind of a short-term thing, or are those education costs going to, is this becoming enough of an issue that's going to cause a major market dynamic change? And is that market dynamic change going to be the emergence of more of technical education, more certification-based education, getting away maybe from traditional sort of degree programs and really focusing the effort and the energy on the how-to sort of skills? Much like you're to a certain extent, you're getting within a program like this, there's a very tangible, applied aspect to it versus the more abstract nature of certain types of programs without naming them. Okay, does that make sense?
There's a sort of like cultural aspect to that as well, where I find like young people who their parents own like the big house with the white picket fence, they are kind of getting away from that, because their parents did it. They kind of want to be,
absolutely,
if the word is rebellious from what that is, and do something different. Whereas young people who their parents didn't have were not as fortunate, and they're still aspiring for those things. Like you see, like in Atlanta, there's a lot of young blacks that are buying, some of those big houses, white picket fence, the American dream, and so like culture and everything and economics has a play into it. And even like in California, there's a lot of Asians that are coming to California that are buying big houses because their cultural lifestyle is their parents usually live with them. So they're not looking for like the small apartment. They're looking for a big house, 5 bedrooms, whatever, because the whole family's there. So.
Sure. Okay, right.
A good litmus test for this is that, people that are under 25, if you had double the income and no debt,
Exactly right.
would you live in a small place, or would you get a big place that's maybe 15-minute drive?
Right.
Just piggybacking on the student housing or the cost of education, this magazine was talking about the market for student housing and creating income from there. It says that in 2011, transactions were only 2.5 billion for student housing. In 2000, and it grew to 4 billion in 2012. So student housing is a big market sector that's growing.
Yeah, and here's an interesting aspect to that as well. Once again, you talk about evolution over time in terms of how student housing. Once again, if we go back to, let's say, whenever I was, in the student situation, You know, we lived in residence halls where you had 20 guys on a floor with one bathroom in the middle with, you know, all shared everything, you know, and very little privacy, very little, you know, sort of, it was very raw, you know, in the sense that the rooms, you know, linoleum floors with, you know, I mean, it was just raw, okay? And then you take a look at that, and then what has happened subsequent to that, now many of these student housing projects, you know, have evolved into very posh, very upscale, you know, super high-end kind of, you know, almost resort-style communities that have, you know, a tremendous number of services and you know, that sort of things attached to them. And, you know, but it's just interesting, that evolution is my point, you know, that what was adequate. I'm not saying that we should go back to that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that that's what it sort of started out as to a certain extent and has evolved now into a very, very different sort of thing. And is that, and this is my point with this, is that, or has that really been driven by, you know, it's a combination of things of the parents saying, we want something better for our kids, and so therefore what ends up happening is this very higher end product ends up being developed.
You don't think that's a product of, when a student takes out student loans, they can take out a multiple above what they actually need?
There's another problem, yes, I would agree. That is another aspect to this, is the free-flowing funds of student loans that tend to, you know, can have a very negative impact of luring people, you know, into a situation of comfort of saying, I can get all the student loan money, therefore price doesn't really matter, and then ultimately at the end of the day, can they really, you know, afford to, you know, live off that? So, but yeah, the point is extremely well taken. You know that you know, this has definitely been a huge growth market for real estate developers of hopping into that whole student housing market and then developing some really high-end product. And as a matter of fact, a lot of those products are built on university land with ground leases that ultimately would then revert back to the university after 20, 30 years, whatever it might be. Okay, somebody in the back, do you guys have a question? Oh, you're just moving your arms, okay.
I know I'm 26, so I'm a little bit outside the
Outside the bubble.
But
Okay.
you know, in your generation, when you know, when you would get married,
Right.
you would, you know, the man was typically the sole provider and the woman. Now it's obviously
Doesn't matter.
both. So I guess my question would be, I mean, would that have more of a more sustainable, I guess, because now you have a dual income? As opposed to-
But yet again, that also got back, that also is kind of an interesting question just from the, once again, ideology versus necessity.
Yeah.
You know, because I would argue that maybe initially a lot of it and was done, you know, from out of necessity, that, you know, the wife potentially going to work and, you know, coming, you know, in with additional income to help support the family. And then, you know, now maybe it's a bit more of ideological, it's maybe necessity and ideological of the thing of simply there's no reason for it to be that way. Why can it not just simply be you have two folks that have entered into a relationship and then ultimately they mutually support each other? But yeah, it's obviously evolved.
And, you know, a huge flood of couples that now have dual income. You have all of these people who now can afford all of those properties, which drives up the price of those properties, and it should kind of even out to the way it was before, as far as what, you know, what people are doing with the money that they can afford eventually.
Okay. All right. Good points. So other articles, other topics. So we're sort of going over-
Multifamily housing boom. Multifamily showdown. Let's see, this is Commercial Investment Magazine.
Okay.
Basically saying that new construction during the recession was really slow. Now it's picked up big time, but also job growth has picked up as well, and buyers battle and sellers win now. So it said the multifamily cap rates have dropped from 8.5% in 2001 to 6% in 2014. Price per units grew 70%, and vacancy rate, vacancy rate dropped 50%, while rent growth climbs at 1% per year. So essentially, these are still the low-risk things that
Which is, we talked about that quite a bit last week, you know, this whole business that multifamily residential, you know, is probably the safest at the moment, you know, form of real estate investment, you know, a lot of opportunity there as long as, once again, you've got a stable employment base and, you know, not an oversupply within that particular market.
And that's the gotcha with the new constructions. In high growth, high job growth markets, it's fine. They're you know, the rents will probably still continue to improve, but they give an example of a middle tier market like Louisville, where job growth was only 1,900. If they build 4,000 units, then the gotcha is you might see some rent impact.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Other articles.
Well, I actually have a question on that, because
Okay.
it's like something I've been hearing a lot at work is how like Plantation and Fort Lauderdale, they're all building condos and multifamily because land values are so high that it only makes financial sense to build this. So what's gonna happen? Do we think that like they're gonna oversupply the market again, or how's that all gonna play out? Because Plantation, for example, it's like everything that's getting built there is multifamily. Everything in the pipeline, that's all they want to build, and I just don't understand where the demand is gonna come from.
Well, there's a bit of a pent-up demand to begin with, so that, you know, is going to satiate some of that
Yeah.
demand. So at some point, yeah, it'll sort of plateau. But I would also argue, because of the regulatory environment here, it's not as easy to get projects built, and so as a result, you know, it may not be as much of a flooding of the market that, you know, could have happened in other markets that are much less regulated. But at the same time, it doesn't say it won't occur. I'm just saying that it's probably less likely to occur. But you know, there's no question, yeah, there's been, you know, substantial, you know, because usually what triggers a developer to say time to build is whenever you have statistics that come out and say rent growth is up, occupancy is down, you know, then they've, you know, got to start, you know, thinking about building. But the problem that, you know, you've got to also, you know, consider as well is, you know, kind of our whole front door, back door thing of just because, you know, rent growth is up and occupancies are down, is the rent growth up enough to substantiate the additional acquisition price of the higher cost of the land?
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, do you put yourself into a situation of where you may actually have, relatively speaking, razor-thin margins, you know, on the property that you're saying, in order to make this project feasible, we're going to have to rent out these one bedrooms for, I don't know, $1,500 a month, and all the other projects in the city are maybe currently renting at $1,350. You know, just because your project is new, does that inherently guarantee you're going to get that $1,500? But if you don't get that $1,500 and all you get is the $1,350 or something less than that, because of potentially the razor-thin margins that you may have, you know, in play because of the high cost of the land acquisition, doesn't mean the project's going to be successful.
Yeah, well, it's just like office rates are up, vacancies
Yep.
are down, like in the CBD, for example, here, like, we're writing reports on it all the time, but they can't build office
Right.
product here because the land is too expensive.
Right.
And so I just.
Which proves my point. You know, that's the
Yeah.
whole idea, that it's like whenever a developer then, you know, tries to do the front door, back door, they're saying, can't do it. You know, land's just too expensive. And then at some point, what has to theoretically occur, either the rents are going to have to escalate even further, or the land costs are going to have to drop.
Yeah.
You know, or some of the regulatory hurdles have to drop. You know, so, you know, there's all those different things kind of in play. But, you know, yeah, there's no question that's one of the big issues of the land costs are just too high. But do you have maybe a handful of landowners with pockets of, you know, properties around here that are maybe just kind of waiting, you know, and that they may not sell, but they may choose to develop themselves and ultimately, you know, try to cash in pretty quickly. Okay? Thoughts?
I have
Okay,
a question about that. What happens, okay, if rents are high, no one can afford to live in an area, jobs are not paying enough so people can afford, do people migrate at that point?
No, I mean, usually what would happen is if you've got properties that are obviously going unfilled, in other words, they're not being occupied because people can't afford them, then at some point that property owner is more than likely going to have to reduce their rents.
And offer concessions?
Yeah, offer concessions, and that's usually whenever you tell, the simplest way to tell if you've got a soft apartment market is whenever you're looking around and virtually every single property is offering some sort of a rental concession. Okay, that's like, without question, the easiest way to kind of tell that something bad is on the horizon, or maybe new product is coming online that they want to compete with, or they want to lock in maybe for, quicker, to keep from, potentially being in direct competition with them immediately. So that's another thing to consider. And that actually brings up another, actually, while we're sort of, since you brought that up, the whole idea of rental concessions, and kind of an old trick, I don't know if this is the right word for it, not something in any way, shape, form, or fashion I would advocate at all, because it's totally unethical, illegal, whatever words you want to use. But one of the things that sometimes would happen, especially with apartments that are being sold, we're talking about more of people that would own, let's say, 50 units or 100 units or something like that, not the big players, talking about a lot of the smaller players in a market. And what they were going to be having difficulty getting their properties leased, well, they would come up with all these games of the rental concessions to make it look as though their rent rolls are much stronger than what they really are. And so the game that might be played would be, we give you 1 or 2 months rent free up front, but then we charge you a higher rent rate than the market would ordinarily bear for the remainder of the term, because once again, what is the value going to be based off of? Net operating income. You follow? So just to keep things simple, okay, for a moment. Let's say that you've got a situation of where that we're charging $1,200 a month. And maybe the concession is effectively 2 months free. Well, automatically, that's $2,400 of income that's just poof, all right? But if we take and we multiply out that $1,200 a month times 12, make sure I don't screw it up. So $144,000. Okay, now a lot of times whenever they would do these rental concessions, they would maybe actually force you to sign a 14-month lease.
Right. Yes.
So that technically you get that first couple of months free, but then sometimes they would also then, they play all kinds of games, but let's kind of keep it simple for the moment. So we take this 144,000,
It's 14.
I'm sorry, 144,000. Oh, hold on, I put it in wrong, 1,200 times 12.
That's a lot of money.
14, okay. One extra zero, sorry about that. All right, 14,400, I thought that looked kind of high. 14,400, all right, and we subtract out the 2,400 that technically you're not getting. Let's just say we keep it under a 12-month horizon. So it'll be 12 grand a year. So really our, divided by 12 months, our effective rent is really only $1,000 a month instead of $1,200, right? Okay, and that's the number that we really should be using for our rent rolls. But what would happen in a lot of these instances is they would still use the $1,200 and say, we're really, but now you're saying, well, okay, big deal, what's the value difference? Well, in this particular case, it'd be, 14,400 versus, let's say, 12,000 as our, and it's not quite NOI, but just for simplicity's sake, assuming that it is, we kind of put in, once again, in our ERV model, and we say that we've got $12,000 a year of income at a 6% cap rate. That's a value per unit of 200,000 that we would sell it at, theoretically, versus the income of the 14,400 at 6%. Of 240,000. So effectively getting a 20%, increase in the sale price. Now that's assuming that you've got, obviously, number one, a crooked seller and an uninformed buyer, okay? In the sense that the uninformed buyer doesn't understand what they're really looking at with regard to the rent rolls, and not truly factoring in the cost of those concessions. Any decent purchaser should be able to kind of ferret through that information and figure it out, but yet there are those folks that may not. And the thing is, and it doesn't necessarily just apply to, obviously, apartment communities. You could do this on retail, you can do it on office. Well, I'm sorry?
Happens every day in retail.
And so the difficulty then is coming up with, well, what is, or what should be the true value, of the property with all those concessions that have been put into place. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
Two questions I have.
Yep.
First, it's not too hard to uncover as a buyer though, correct?
It's theoretically no.
Okay.
Practically sometimes yes, but
Doesn't it work itself out in year 2, 3?
yeah.
So that
Well,
would assume it was a pre-sale or they're buying it in year 1. Okay. But 2 and 3.
yeah, it's just a question, that they could have engaged in a longer term lease, but the point being is that effective rent is really what should have been quoted, because if you've got the buyer that's thinking that, wow, for some reason they're getting a premium rent relative to other players in the market, why are they getting that premium?
I think sometimes it causes problems in like the office market, because when you're tracking trends, and let's say a building was going for $30 a square foot and it gets, 95% leased up, and now they're all going for $32 a square foot, but you don't realize that when they filled it, most of them were being filled with like all these concessions, and a lot of times they put confidentiality clauses.
Yes,
so
they do.
The people tracking them can't know this information, and then the next person who goes into lease assumes that they have to pay
Right.
a higher price, and
And
then
this
they
is
demand
why,
a higher price.
right, and this is why that, as a prospective purchaser, you're gonna want a minimum of two things. You're gonna want all the leases, the actual leases themselves, or have the opportunity to review all of the leases along with the actual rent rolls, and be able to see if there's any of this kind of funny business potentially going on with regard to concessions. Okay, questions?
Free rent is always given.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that.
If you inflate the.
Yeah, it's more of the situation of, are you really trying to pull one over on a prospective buyer by engaging in manipulation of the information? Because to me, it's fraudulent, if you are. Now, simply, handing over matter-of-fact information and they just happen to miss it, it's not like you're going to bring it to their attention. I guess, but there's a certain there's a certain element of, well, usually what happens in a lot of those instances is you are given the documentation as a prospective buyer. Then if you have questions, you would then come back and say, okay, well, what about, is this tenant actually being given a rental concession and that sort of thing, and then you would begin that dialogue.
Free rent would be shown. You would be shown in your.
Right, to the extent, yeah.
Right.
Right, within the lease, but yet,
Even
but
your cash flow.
but even with the rent rolls, it is not always going to be inherently completely visible, is what I'm saying.
That same trick is played on the tenant also, right? If you come in and say, hey, I'm gonna give you 2 months free up front, versus 2 months free prorated over the duration of the
Right,
lease.
right, right.
It's a different factor, right?
Right. Okay. All right, other questions? Okay, let's take our little lunch break, so I'll give you about 30 minutes. Okay? Sick.